Over the weekend, Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican, generated some controversy when it appeared that he was endorsing the idea that slavery was a necessary evil. Now, he rebuts this, as you'll see, but you can understand why there's a little bit of uncertainty, because when you look at what he actually said during an interview, his exact quote was, "As the founding fathers said, it was the necessary evil upon which the Union was built, but the Union was built in a way, as Lincoln said, to put slavery on the course to its ultimate extinction," which would seem, as quotes go, to really put this thing to rest. He definitely said, "As the founding fathers said, it was the necessary evil." That implies agreement, I feel like.
For sure.
Am I being... Look, I know that I dwell in a bubble, and maybe we dwell in similar bubbles. Are we being unreasonable in reading, "As the founding fathers said, it was the necessary evil," as being not in disagreement with the founding fathers?
Yeah, no, that's very much in agreement. Like, they were right, and then 100 years later, Lincoln was also right, who probably doubled down on that. And then now 150 years later, in the year 2020, that's still my position. Like, I don't evolve past that. And yeah, no, that's where we should go. In fact, that's when America was great again. Did I say that? Did I need to say that out loud? No?
Yeah. Okay, so look, I think it's pretty cut and dried, but he is facing questions about this. So we're going to turn now to Fox and Friends, most important show in America, where Tom Cotton appeared earlier today.
And here's part of your interview with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Quote, "We have to study the history of slavery and its role and impact on the development of our country, because otherwise we can't understand our country. As the founding fathers said, it was the necessary evil upon which the Union was built, but the Union was built in a way, as Lincoln said, to put slavery on the course to ultimate extinction." Some say that was insensitive.
Well, that is fake news, Brian. That's not what I said. What I said is that many founders believed that only with the Union and the Constitution could we put slavery on the path to its ultimate extinction. That's exactly what Lincoln said. Of course, slavery is a evil institution in all its forms at all times, in America's past or around the world today. But the fundamental moral principle of America is right there in the Declaration. All men are created equal. And the history of America is the long and sometimes difficult struggle to live up to that principle.
So there's some stuff at the end there that I definitely want to get to, but Brian Kilmeade read the exact quote, and Tom Cotton called it fake news and said, "That's not what I said," when that is quite literally the exact thing that you said. It was Brian Kilmeade's voice, I guess, technically, but it was your words.
I mean, this is the whole thing. Like, you're not answering the question. Yeah, you just got your quote read back to you, and the question is, do you think it was insensitive? He can say, no, not really. But that'd be a perfectly acceptable answer. But instead he said, it's fake news. I didn't just say what you quoted me as saying. Mm-hmm. So already we're not off to a good start. Future presidential candidate Tom Cotton, because that's where he's headed. Yep. Let's just remember, though, that this entire discussion around slavery has all been sort of initiated by the right wing triggering from the podcast 1619 of the New York Times. Yes. Because they feel, and Tom Cotton has now introduced, an act or something?
Piece of legislation, yeah.
Piece of legislation, because they feel that 1619, which I believe, was it that it received some government money? Whatever it is, it's a bad project. Let's not talk about it. La, 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 la. It was a necessary evil. That's what they said back then. That's what I'm sticking with right now. Like, how can you be triggered by this? What are you talking about? You claim that American history is so important, and yet now you happens to be a Black-led podcast by the New York Times. You can't handle that kind of history? Yeah. Like, you just want your history like between two pieces of white bread, lots of mayo, founding father, eat this,
Yeah. So there's a couple issues in addition that I have. I mean, he could have just said, I was speaking off the cuff, and if I offend anyone, I apologize. What I meant was they believe that. Obviously, I don't believe that. Instead, he says, it was fake news, I didn't say that. That is how devoid of substance the entirety of American politics and political rhetoric is in 2020. That you can't just say, sorry, I misspoke. It was an interview. I was speaking. I shouldn't have said that. Obviously, I don't believe that. That's crazy. But because he doesn't he did say it, and in that little response, he doesn't actually say they were wrong. It leads to people asking him follow-up questions on Twitter, like, were the founders right or wrong, Tom Cotton, when they called slavery a necessary evil upon which the Union was built? Because either you agree with their assessment of slavery as necessary, or you admit they were lying and it was just an evil and dishonorable choice. But he doesn't want to answer that question. Because while he wants to pretend that he doesn't believe that it was necessary, he clearly thinks it was necessary and in the best interest of America to continue it. He doesn't say that they're wrong. And it's interesting that, really fast, it's interesting that, like, he gets called out on this quote, and he says, well, look, you got to understand the context of what they were saying. It was back then and it was complex. You have to understand the context. Even if it's difficult, we need to delve into the context while denouncing a project whose goal is to delve into the actual context, even though it's difficult, so that we understand what was actually going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's ridiculous that you can be triggered this much by a podcast. And he definitely said, I believe that the founding fathers who said it was a necessary evil were right. I mean, that's what his statement says. It's that, like, let's look back. It was a necessary evil, which in what world, right? And I don't even think that Lincoln's quote of the Union or this country was always meant to phase out slavery. I'm not even sure if you can say that was accurate, right? I mean, then we had a civil war because a lot of people didn't think that was the premise of the country. It wasn't really the necessary evil. It was the evil that everyone was turning a blind eye to. And the necessary part of it, I mean, I know we don't want to get back into the words, but to think that now, as I think not just Tom Cotton, but probably a lot of white people, a lot of, maybe it's people in the South, people missing the Confederacy, the idea that it was necessary, I think is a really horribly crass and untrue version of this country's history, right? It was like, you suffered, we had to enslave you, and we got rich in the meantime. Oh, and by the way, no reparations. That's bad. So it's like, if you think it's necessary, maybe that would impact the way you think about structural racism or reparations or the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, et cetera, today. But it doesn't. It's not that. It's like, no, this was a sacrifice. It was necessary, and, shut up. Yeah. Essentially.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, if you feel like, the 1619 Project, despite the fact that they're professional historians and I'm not, I'm just, a jackass senator, they don't get it. I get it. Okay, well then do something about it. But you don't actually want to describe it better. You want to move on from it. And why wouldn't you? People like you already got the money. So, a couple other things that he mentioned there. One was, it was the founding of America. It was necessary to finally get rid of it. And that is what was so amazing about the founding fathers, is that they were planning ahead to get rid of it. And that's why so many of them kept their slaves, even after all those quotes I'm reading for you. And by the way, in terms of it was the only way we were going to get rid of it was to make a break from Britain and create this great new country, I am not a British historian, so understand that. But broad strokes, Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 with the Slave Trade Act. And then with the British Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, they ended slavery in most of their colonies. Right. That was more than 3 decades before a war finally got us to end slavery here. So it seems like we would have gotten rid of it faster if we'd remained a colony. Now, obviously, I don't want to remain a colony, but it's just weird revisionism that it was their plan all along. It's very QAnon that they're going to do it. It's going to take 7 decades, maybe 8, and then we're finally going to get rid of it.
No, that's a really good point, the QAnon part. I mean, I think look, I also think it's dangerous to look back on history and graph 2020 values onto all of it. I think that's a mistake, totally. I think that the same way that I remember Condoleezza Rice, which was pretty important for her as an African-American leader to say, I think slavery would have ended on its own. She agreed with that. I think it was that or I also think Black people would have gotten the right to vote out of the goodness of white people's heart. Lies. It's also important for us to to not just go back and be like, again, graft all of our values and morals and human rights, which we know are right now, but which were also right then in the time. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but I guess I think that it's easy to assume that history is going to play out in the interest of good, that everything is just going to happen. It's all going to be good, and we're all going to move towards more and more perfection and evolution. Well, look at who's effing president right now. Look at what's happening in Portland. That's not the way history works. History is about struggle. History is about, unfortunately, war. It is about, it is about actually working and making these demands on the powerful. So anyone who warns you or tells you that it was all going to happen, don't listen to them. Or that, and then by the same token, like that colonialism or that slavery, it was all necessary for the project, the American project, also call BS on that.
Yeah, it's nice to feel like, okay, stuff is rough, but it always moves towards justice. That is nice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't just happen. We have to help it.
Yes.
And on that note, one final point. So he says at the end of his little thing that, slavery was this great evil, I acknowledge that, and we've struggled ever since then against slavery and racism, these original sins that I totally still believe are necessary evils, but I'll pretend that it's just them. We've been struggling ever since. So here's the thing. People have been struggling ever since, but we've been struggling as if the whole country together has been struggling to get over that. That's not how that worked at all. The slaves, their descendants, have been struggling the entire time, and thankfully they've had some allies in increasing number as the decades went on, but it sure took a long time. For a very, very, very long time, I would say up until and including today, there have been any number of people who have not been involved in that struggle, not on the same side anyway. They've been fighting against it. And I would say that the sort of people who want to pretend that slavery wasn't what it was, that it was benevolent or not so bad, or maybe it was necessary, hey, look, we got a lot of money, those people have been around since slavery. They were making that case then.
Yep.
Thankfully, that's rarer now. But there are still people like Tom Cotton attacking the 1619 Project who are not allies in this fight, that are trying to either rewrite history or just move past it and ignore it and pretend that it didn't matter, that it has no effects on us today. Tom Cotton is not an ally in that fight.
You're absolutely right. I just want to tag that and say this is exactly what it's about. I mean, if we think that having a white nationalist in the presidency, having a resurgence of neo-Nazis, having killers drive their cars into Black Lives Matter protests, get out and start shooting, like what happened this weekend in Austin.
Yeah.
If we think that the legacy of slavery and the Civil War and the civil rights movement is over, if we think, then we're idiots. We're complete idiots. And we're never actually going to move ahead, even if you are, racist. That you're an idiot as well. But I'm saying, like, you have no understanding of what it means to actually look at our history. You don't want to move past it. You don't know. In fact, you embrace the whatever it is that's happening, the coming race war, right? You embrace this kind of violence. You want it to go on, and you yourself are fomenting yet another civil war. Not the Black Lives Matter protesters. The Black Lives Matter protesters, the people who are actually talking about this history, want healing. They want justice. They want to right those wrongs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, I think it's, once again, a podcast, y'all. It's a podcast.
Yeah. And by the way, in terms of being an ally, there are these protests going on right now where Black Lives Matter is saying, hey, stop choking us out on the streets of American cities every single day. And Tom Cotton, never forget, his initial response to that was, we should send in the military and give them no quarter. We should kill them and not take prisoners. That actually seems a bit more like something he would have had back in the 1860s. So I guess he is historically minded. But again, not on the right side of that conflict.
On the side of the British.
Exactly. Send in the troops and kill the black protesters is not what you say, and then expect goodwill when you start throwing around the terms like necessary evil. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.